The woman in the blood-red dress stood at the edge of the open grave like a flame in a field of ash, and Isidore Stravaux had seen empires rise and fall, but nothing quite as defiant as her posture in this moment. She was the only spot of color in the entire cemetery. Everyone else wore black, their faces appropriately somber, their clothes appropriately mournful, their tears appropriately timed. She wore crimson silk that caught the wind, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her chin lifted high as the priest droned through the funeral rites. She didn't cry. She didn't bow her head. She simply stood there, a declaration made flesh. Isidore watched from the far side of the gathering, his white hair stark against his black coat, his pale skin drawing no attention because he'd learned centuries ago how to make himself invisible in plain sight. But his eyes, darker than they should be given his coloring, never left the woman in red. "Who is she?" he murmured to Victor, his second, who stood slightly behind him. "Ophelia Everhart," Victor replied, equally quiet. "The deceased's fiancé, or former fiancé, I suppose. Former fiancé, and she'd worn red to his funeral." Isidore felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in decades. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. The priest finished his final prayer. People began to file past the casket, dropping flowers, murmuring condolences to the family. The woman in red didn't move. She watched them all with eyes that were clear and dry and absolutely certain. An older woman approached her, face pinched with disapproval. Isidore's enhanced hearing caught every word. "Have you no shame?" the woman hissed. "Wearing that to David's funeral, it's disgusting." Ophelia turned to face her fully. "Is it? He was your fiancé. You should be mourning him properly." "Should I?" Ophelia's voice was steady, calm. "Tell me, Mrs. Henderson, did you know David well?" "Well enough to know he deserved better than this disrespect." "Did you know he broke my ribs twice? That he put me in the hospital 3 times? That he threatened to kill me if I ever left him?" Ophelia's voice never rose, never wavered. She spoke these horrors like she was reciting a grocery list. "I wore red because I'm not sad he's dead. I'm relieved, and I won't pretend otherwise." Mrs. Henderson's face went white, then red. "You're lying. David was a good man, a respected businessman. David was a monster." Ophelia looked around at the gathered crowd, and Isidore saw several people quickly avert their eyes. They'd known, he realized, or suspected. "I won't mourn him. I won't pretend. This dress is my truth, and if that offends you, you're welcome to leave." She turned her back on Mrs. Henderson and walked away from the grave, her red dress billowing behind her like a war banner. Isidore found himself moving before he'd consciously decided to follow. She made it to the parking lot before she stopped, leaning against a sleek black sedan, her hands shaking slightly as she pressed them against the car's hood, the only sign of emotion she'd shown all day. "That was brave," Isidore said quietly, keeping his distance so as not to startle her. She turned, and up close he could see the faint shadows under her eyes, the careful way she held herself, like someone who'd learned to protect old wounds. It was necessary. Most people would have worn black and lied. "I'm tired of lying." She studied him with intelligent eyes, taking in his white hair, his pale skin, the old-world formality of his bearing. "I don't know you." "Isidore Stravaux." He offered a slight bow, purely instinctive. "I knew David through business dealings." Something flickered across her face. "What kind of business?" "Import and export, specialized goods." Not quite a lie. David Mercer had been involved in the blood trade, selling to vampires, stealing from vampires, playing both sides until inevitably it had caught up with him. His death 2 weeks ago had been ruled a heart attack, but Isidore knew better. Someone in the cartel had decided David was a liability. "I'm sorry for your loss, though from what you said, perhaps that's not the right sentiment." "No." She looked back at the funeral, at the crowd of black-clad mourners still gathered around the grave. "I'm not sorry he's dead. I'm sorry it took this long. I'm sorry for the years I lost to him." She paused. You're very pale. Medical condition. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Did you do business with David recently? Not recently, no. Why? Because in the last month before he died, he was terrified. He kept getting phone calls that would make him go white, make him lock himself in his office for hours. She pushed away from the car, standing straight despite the visible exhaustion in her features. He told me it was nothing, that I should mind my own business, but I heard things, names, places. What kind of names? She met his eyes directly. Vampire names. Isidore went very still. Humans weren't supposed to know about vampires. Not really. Not beyond fiction and fantasy. The fact that she spoke the word so calmly, so certainly, meant David had been even more reckless than Isidore had realized. That's a dangerous word to say aloud, he said carefully. I know what I heard. Moraven, Seraphel, Dracon. She pronounced each name with precision. Ring any bells, Mr. Stravaux? All high-ranking members of the Crimson Accord, the blood cartel that operated through major cities across the world. And if David had been dealing with them, if he'd exposed them to his human fiancé, then she was in considerably more danger than she knew. Perhaps, Isidore said slowly, we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Why would I go anywhere with a stranger I just met at my abuser's funeral? Because you're asking questions that could get you killed, and I might be able to help you find answers that won't. He held her gaze. And because you know I'm not human, and you're still standing here talking to me instead of running. She was quiet for a long moment. Around them, people were beginning to leave the cemetery, casting dark looks in her direction. She ignored them all. There's a cafe 3 blocks from here, she said finally. Public, well-lit, security cameras. We can talk there. Acceptable. She drove her own car, Isidore followed in his, and Victor texted him 3 times asking what in the 7 hells he was doing. Isidore ignored all 3 messages. He didn't entirely know what he was doing, only that the woman in the red dress had walked into a situation that would eat her alive if she wasn't careful, and he found he very much wanted to prevent that. The cafe was exactly as she'd described, bright, busy, witnesses everywhere. She ordered black coffee. He ordered the same, though he wouldn't drink it, and they sat at a corner table where they could see the door. You're a vampire, she said without preamble. Yes. King of something, based on the way that other man deferred to you at the funeral. Observant. King of the North American territories, though it's more complicated than that. It always is. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. How old are you? 437. And you knew David was abusing me. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. I suspected. I didn't know for certain until today. Would you have done anything if you'd known? Isidore considered lying, considered deflecting, then decided she'd had enough of lies. Probably not. Humans hurt each other all the time. I try not to interfere unless it affects vampire business. At least you're honest. She took a sip of her coffee. So David was dealing with vampires. Doing what exactly? Selling blood. Humans who were willing to donate or unwilling victims, depending on the buyer's ethics and price point. The Crimson Accord is a cartel that controls most of the blood trade in the Western Hemisphere. They're powerful, ruthless, and they don't leave loose ends. Like me. Like you. She absorbed this without visible fear, which impressed him. So, they killed David because he was a liability, and now I'm a liability, because I know too much. Most likely. What do they do to loose ends? They eliminate them. Quickly if you're lucky, slowly if you've offended them. Ophelia set down her coffee cup very carefully. I see. You're remarkably calm. I spent 5 years waiting for David to kill me. Being afraid all the time gets exhausting. She looked up at him, and he saw something fierce behind her eyes. I don't want to die, Mr. Stravaux. But if I'm going to live, I want to make sure David's death means something. He was selling people to vampires, people who didn't choose it, who were taken or coerced or trafficked. That needs to stop. You want to take down the Crimson Accord. I want to expose what David was doing. I want to free anyone he trapped. I want to make sure no one else suffers because of him. She leaned forward. Can you help me do that? Isidore should have said no, should have walked away, let her make her own choices, focused on his own concerns. The Accord didn't directly challenge his authority. They operated in gray areas, and confronting them would be politically complicated. But she wore red to her abuser's funeral. She spoke truth when everyone else wanted comfortable lies. She sat across from the vampire king of North America and asked him for help dismantling a blood cartel without a tremor in her voice. He'd lived 4 centuries and never met anyone quite like her. "Yes," he said, "I can help." Her smile was small but genuine. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This will be dangerous. Everything worth doing usually is." They spent the next 2 hours going through everything she knew. David had kept meticulous records, she said, because he was paranoid and wanted insurance. She had his laptop, his files, his phone. She'd been collecting evidence even while he was alive, planning her escape, documenting everything in case she needed proof. "I was going to leave him," she explained. "After his business trip next month. I had money saved, a plan, a friend in another city who would take me in. Then he died, and I thought maybe I was free." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out death doesn't solve everything." "Rarely does." "You would know?" "I would." She studied him across the table. "Why are you helping me? Really?" Isidore considered the question. "Because you wore red," he said finally. "Because everyone else was lying and you refused to. Because in 400 years, I've learned to recognize truth when I see it. And you walked into that funeral wearing it like armor." Something softened in her expression. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." "Then you've been spending time with the wrong people." No argument there. They exchanged phone numbers before parting ways. Isidore insisted on having someone watch her apartment, just in case. She didn't argue, which told him she was more afraid than she let on. Victor was waiting when Isidore returned to his estate, a sprawling mansion on the edge of the city that looked modern from the outside and like a medieval castle inside. Isidore had never seen the point of pretending to be something he wasn't. "You're getting involved with a human woman," Victor said without preamble. "I'm helping someone who asked for help. You're the vampire king. You don't help random humans with their problems." "She's not random. She's connected to the Accord, she has information we can use, and she's in danger." Victor gave him a long look. "You like her." "I respect her." "Isidore, you gave her your personal phone number." "She needed a way to contact me." "You've lived 4 centuries without giving your personal number to anyone outside the inner circle." Isidore poured himself a glass of wine from a crystal decanter, more for something to do with his hands than any desire to drink it. "She wore red to her abuser's funeral, Victor. She stood in front of everyone who expected her to mourn and told them the truth instead. When was the last time you saw someone do something like that?" "Never," Victor admitted. "But that doesn't mean she's not dangerous." "Of course she's dangerous. Anyone who tells the truth is dangerous. That's why I like her." Victor sighed. The long-suffering sigh of someone who'd been dealing with Isidore's decisions for 200 years and knew when an argument was lost. "Fine. But when the Accord comes after her, we're going to have a political nightmare on our hands. Then we'll handle it. And if you're doing this because you're attracted to her, Victor, which you clearly are, I can see it in your face, Victor, then you need to be prepared for the fact that she's human, fragile, mortal. She could die tomorrow from 100 different things that wouldn't even slow you down." Isidore set down his wine glass. "I'm aware of human mortality, thank you." "Are you? Because the last time you cared about a human was before I was even born, and you still don't talk about how that ended. This is different." "How?" "Because I'm not 25 years old and stupid anymore. Because I know what I'm doing. Because she asked for help, not a relationship." Isidore looked at his oldest friend. "And because whether I'm attracted to her or not, she deserves better than to die because her abuser was a criminal. I can give her that much." Victor held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "All right. What do you need from me?" "Information on the Accord's current operations, locations, contacts, anyone who worked directly with David Mercer. And I want surveillance on Ophelia Everhart doubled." If the Accord makes a move, I want to know about it before they're within a mile of her. Done. Victor headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think she's brave too. Stupid, but brave. The best people usually are. Ophelia called him the next morning. Someone broke into my apartment last night, she said without preamble. Isidore was on his feet before she finished the sentence. Are you hurt? No. Your people scared them off, I think, but they were looking for something. David's files. Probably. I have them all in a safety deposit box, but they wouldn't know that. Where are you now? At work. I'm an artist. I teach classes at the community center downtown. She paused. I figured public place. Lots of people. Relatively safe. Smart. Stay there. I'm sending someone to watch you. You can't just send bodyguards everywhere I go. I'm the Vampire King. I can do whatever I want. He heard her laugh, short and surprised. Fair point. But I have a life, Mr. Stravaux. Students who depend on me, commitments I can't just abandon. I'm not asking you to abandon anything. I'm asking you to let me keep you alive while we figure this out. Silence then. Okay, but the bodyguard has to be discreet. I don't want to scare my students. I'll send someone subtle. He sent Mira, a vampire who looked like a college student and could blend into any crowd. She'd been turned at 22 and had a gift for seeming harmless right up until she wasn't. Isidore spent the day reviewing the information Victor had compiled on the Accord. The more he read, the more disgusted he became. David Mercer had been a small player in a very large, very ugly operation. Blood trafficking, forced turnings, humans held captive and drained repeatedly until they died. All of it carefully hidden behind legitimate businesses, shell corporations, respectable fronts. And Ophelia wanted to expose all of it. He admired her courage. He also wanted to lock her in a very safe room until this was over. She called again that evening. I want to go through David's files with you. Can I come to your place? That's not a good idea. Why not? Because having you in my home feels dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with the Accord. Because it's not secure. If they're watching you, they'll see you come here. So we'll be careful. I'll take a rideshare to a different location, switch cars, whatever spy nonsense you think is necessary. Her voice softened. I need to do this, Isidore. I need to see exactly what he was involved in. I need to understand. She'd used his first name. He wasn't sure when he told her she could do that, but he found he didn't mind. All right, but we do it my way. Victor will pick you up at the community center. Take a route to make sure you're not followed. Don't bring your phone. Why not? Because phones can be tracked. Leave it at home, tell anyone who asks that it died, and you forgot your charger. You really are paranoid. I really am old. There's a difference. She laughed again, and Isidore realized he was starting to collect those laughs. Treasure them like small, precious things. Victor brought her to the estate after dark. She stepped out of the car wearing jeans and a sweater, the exact shade of the dress she'd worn to the funeral, and Isidore wondered if she owned anything that wasn't some variation of red. This is your house? She asked, staring up at the Gothic facade. One of them. How many do you have? I stopped counting at 12. She turned to look at him, eyebrow raised. Must be nice being immortal and rich. It has its moments. He led her inside, through halls lined with art that spanned centuries, past rooms filled with books in languages that no longer existed. She took it all in with artist's eyes, pausing at a painting by a Renaissance master that most people didn't even know existed. That's real, she said. Most things in here are. You knew him, the painter, briefly. What was he like? Temperamental. Brilliant. Died too young, like most brilliant people do. She looked at him then, really looked at him. Is that what happened to the last human you cared about? Victor, damn him, must have said something. Yes. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Doesn't make it hurt less. No, it really didn't. Come on, the files are in my study. They spread everything out on the massive oak desk that had belonged to a French duke before Isidore won it in a card game in 1823. Financial records, names, addresses, photographs that made Ophelia go pale, but she didn't look away. These people, she said quietly, touching a photo of a woman who looked terrified. Are they still alive? Some of them. Victor's been tracking the locations. Several are active holding sites. We need to free them. We will. But we need to be smart about it. The Accord has protection, political connections, humans and vampires both who benefit from keeping this quiet. So we don't keep it quiet. We expose everything. If we expose everything before we have people safe, they'll kill everyone involved to eliminate evidence. Ophelia's hand clenched on the photograph. Then we get them out first, all of them. And then we burn the Accord to the ground. You're very bloodthirsty for an artist. I told you, I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of people getting away with hurting others because no one wants to make a fuss. She looked up at him. David hurt me for 5 years, and everyone knew, and no one did anything because it was easier to look away. I won't look away from this. Isidore felt something in his chest tighten, something that hadn't moved in decades. She was going to get herself killed. This brave, fierce woman in her red sweater, and he was going to have to live with that for the rest of his very long life, unless he made sure she didn't die. All right, he said, we'll do it your way, but we do it carefully, and you follow my lead on anything involving vampires. Deal. They worked through the night, and Isidore found himself watching her as much as the files. The way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the way she pushed her hair back absently, the way she made small notes in the margins with artist's handwriting that was half print, half script. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was alive in a way he'd forgotten humans could be. Tell me about the last human you loved, she said around 3 in the morning, when they were both exhausted and running on coffee and stubbornness. Why? Because I want to know what I'm up against. You're not up against anything. Isidore. She set down her pen. I'm not stupid. I see the way you look at me. His dead heart would have skipped a beat if it could. How do I look at you? Like you're trying to decide if I'm worth the trouble. She met his eyes steadily. Am I? He could lie. Should tell her this was purely business, that he helped people sometimes, that she was nothing special. But she'd worn red to her abuser's funeral, and he found he couldn't lie to her. Her name was Celeste, he said quietly. I met her in 1634. I was young for a vampire, barely a century old, still learning what I was. She was a painter, brilliant, angry at the world for making her hide her work because she was a woman. We fell in love. I thought we'd have forever. What happened? Plague. It swept through Paris, killed thousands. I could have turned her, made her immortal, but she refused. She said she'd lived her life as she chose, and she'd die the same way. She got sick, and I held her hand while she died, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Ophelia was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry. That's the problem with loving humans when you're immortal. You always know how it ends. Does it have to end that way? Usually. But not always. No, not always. She reached across the desk and took his hand. Her skin was warm, alive, everything he wasn't. I don't know what this is between us, but I know I'm not afraid of it, and I know I'm not ready to die yet, so we're going to have to keep me alive long enough to figure it out. Isidore turned her hand over in his, studying the lines of her palm like they held answers. You're asking me to care about someone who could die any day. I'm asking you to take a chance on someone who's already decided you're worth the risk. You barely know me. I know you helped me when you didn't have to. I know you've kept me safe when you could have walked away. I know you're 400 years old and you still remember the name of the woman you loved, which means you're capable of caring even if you pretend you're not. She squeezed his hand. That's enough for now. It was foolish. It was dangerous. It was the worst idea he'd had in centuries. He was absolutely going to do it anyway. We should get you home, he said. It's almost dawn. Do you really have to avoid the sun? Yes. Burns like you wouldn't believe. That must be lonely, never seeing daylight. You get used to it. After a few decades, you forget what you're missing. She stood, gathering her things, then paused at the door. Thank you. For helping me. For telling me about Celeste. For being honest. You make it easy to be honest. She smiled, and he thought about what it would be like to see that smile every night for the next century or two. Victor drove her home as the sky started to lighten in the east. Isidore watched from the window, staying well back from any possible sunlight, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The Accord made their move 3 days later. Ophelia was teaching a class, working with a group of teenagers on perspective drawing when the lights went out. Mira was there instantly, putting herself between Ophelia and the door, but she wasn't fast enough. The vampire who came through the window was old, fast, and had clearly been sent to kill, not capture. Mira fought him, bought precious seconds, but he was stronger. He threw her across the room and went straight for Ophelia. Isidore felt it the moment she was in danger. The blood bond was faint, barely there, just from her handling things he'd touched. But it was enough. He moved faster than he'd moved in years, crossing the city in a blur, breaking through the community center wall like it was paper. The vampire had Ophelia by the throat. She was fighting, clawing at his hands, her face turning purple. Isidore ripped the vampire's head off before he could process what was happening. Ophelia collapsed, gasping, and Isidore caught her before she hit the ground. Around them, teenagers screamed and scattered. Mira was already up, bleeding but functional, herding the students out of the building. "I'm sorry," Isidore said, holding Ophelia close. "I'm so sorry. I should have been faster." "Not your fault," she wheezed. "He was waiting, planned." Of course he'd planned it. The Accord knew Isidore was protecting her now, so they'd made it look random, an attack during the day when they knew he couldn't respond immediately. They'd gambled he couldn't reach her in time. They'd been wrong, but barely. "We need to move," Mira said. "More could be coming." Isidore lifted Ophelia easily, cradling her against his chest. She was shaking, shock setting in, and he could feel her pulse racing against his palm. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe now." "The students. Mira's handling it. She'll make sure they're safe, that they forget what they saw." "You can do that? Make people forget?" "If you're old enough and strong enough, yes." "That's terrifying. That's vampire politics." He took her to the estate, to rooms he'd prepared days ago just in case. Victor had medical supplies ready, blankets, everything a human might need to recover from trauma. Isidore set her gently on a couch and knelt beside her, checking her throat where angry red marks were already blooming into bruises. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was shaky. "You're not fine. You were almost killed." "But I wasn't. You saved me. I should have prevented it from happening at all." She touched his face with trembling fingers. "You can't protect me from everything. The world doesn't work that way." "I can damn well try." "Isidore." She made him look at her. "I knew this was dangerous when I started. I'm not backing down now. They're going to keep coming after you. Then we stop them first." She was impossible, infuriating, and he was absolutely in love with her. The thought stopped him cold. Love. He'd sworn after Celeste that he wouldn't do this again, wouldn't let himself care about someone who could be taken away so easily. But here he was, 400 years later, kneeling beside a human woman who wore red and told the truth, and made him remember what it felt like to want to protect something more than he wanted to protect himself. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That you're going to be the death of me." "You're already dead. Technically undead. That's not better." He laughed despite everything, and she smiled, and Victor cleared his throat from the doorway. "The Accord is calling for a meeting," he said. "They want to discuss terms." Isidore stood, instantly shifting into the vampire king role he'd worn for centuries. "What kind of terms?" "They want the human. In exchange, they'll cease operations in North American territories, pull back to Europe and Asia." "Absolutely not. I told them you'd say that. They said if you refuse, they'll declare war." Ophelia was on her feet, despite Isidore's attempt to keep her seated. "Let me talk to them." "No. Isidore, they want me. Let me face them." "So they can kill you?" "No. So I can tell them I'm not afraid." She straightened, despite the bruises on her throat, despite the fear he could smell on her skin. "You said it yourself. I'm the loose end they want to tie up, so let me prove I'm not worth the trouble. You're worth all the trouble in the world, she softened. That's sweet. Also not helpful right now. Victor was watching them both with barely concealed amusement. For what it's worth, the meeting is on neutral ground. Witnesses from the High Council, full diplomatic protections. They can't actually hurt her there. They'll try anyway. Probably. But we'll be ready. Isidore wanted to refuse, wanted to lock Ophelia in the safest room in the estate and deal with the accord himself. But she was looking at him with those clear, determined eyes, and he knew she'd never forgive him if he tried to protect her from this. Fine, he said, but we do this my way. You don't speak unless I tell you to, you stay behind me at all times, and if anything goes wrong, you run. I'm not running. If anything goes wrong, you run, or I don't let you anywhere near that meeting. She glared at him. You're very bossy for someone who claims to respect me. I respect you enough to know you'll get yourself killed if I'm not bossy. He has a point, Victor offered. Nobody asked you, Ophelia and Isidore said in unison. The meeting was set for midnight in a warehouse district that had been neutral ground for vampire politics for over a century. Isidore dressed in the formal clothes of his position, black on black with silver accents that marked him as royalty. Ophelia wore red again, a different dress but the same defiant color. Are you ever going to wear anything else? He asked as they drove to the meeting. Not if I can help it. Red suits me. It does. Also, it pisses people off, which is a bonus. You're going to give me a heart attack. You don't have a heartbeat. Which is why it'll be especially tragic when you give me one just so it can stop again. She laughed, and some of the tension in the car eased. The warehouse was full of vampires when they arrived. The Crimson Accord on one side, Isidore's people on the other, and representatives from the High Council in between. Ancient vampires all, their white hair and pale skin glowing in the dim light, their eyes assessing everything. Moraven, the head of the Accord, stood at the center. He was old, older than Isidore by at least a century, with the kind of cold eyes that suggested he'd done terrible things and enjoyed them. King Stravaux, he said, voice smooth as poison, how kind of you to join us. Lord Moraven, I hear you want to discuss terms. Indeed, your human has become quite the problem. My human has a name. Does she? How quaint. Moraven's eyes fixed on Ophelia, and Isidore felt her tense behind him. Miss Everhart, you've been making quite the nuisance of yourself. Ophelia stepped forward before Isidore could stop her. I've been exposing crimes. If that's a nuisance to you, perhaps you should reconsider your business practices. Several vampires hissed. Humans didn't speak to vampire lords that way, not if they wanted to keep breathing. Moraven smiled, showing fangs. Bold. I can see why the king likes you. Unfortunately, boldness doesn't change the fact that you know too much about operations you have no right to understand. I have every right. My fiancé was part of your operation, which makes me involved whether I wanted to be or not. Former fiancé, the late unlamented David Mercer. Moraven began to circle them, and Isidore moved to keep himself between the vampire and Ophelia. He was useful until he became sloppy, much like you're being now. I'm not being sloppy. I'm being deliberate. I have copies of every file David kept, every transaction, every name. If anything happens to me, they go public. Human public, not vampire. That caused a stir. The High Council representatives leaned forward, interested now. You're bluffing, Moraven said, but he sounded less certain. Try me. I've already given the files to 3 different journalists, 3 different lawyers, all with instructions to publish if I disappear or die. You can kill me, but you can't silence me. It was a lie, Isidore knew, but a brilliant one. He'd helped her set up the dead man's switch earlier, but she was selling it like she'd done it weeks ago. Moraven's expression darkened. The king has taught you well. The king didn't teach me anything. I learned to protect myself from my abuser. You're just another bully who thinks he can intimidate me into silence. She stepped fully out from behind Isidore, despite his attempt to stop her. Here's my counteroffer. You shut down every human trafficking operation you run, you release everyone you're holding captive, and you stay out of North America entirely. In exchange, I keep your secrets. The human world never has to know vampires exist. And if we refuse? Then I publish everything, every name, every location, every transaction. I'll make sure the whole world knows exactly what you are and what you've done. Let's see how long you last when every hunter and government agency on the planet is looking for you." The warehouse went silent. Isidore stared at Ophelia, torn between pride and terror. She'd just threatened the most powerful vampire cartel in the world, and she'd done it without flinching. Moraven looked at Isidore. "You'll allow this? You're human threatening your own kind?" "She's not threatening our kind. She's threatening criminals who give us all a bad name." Isidore moved to stand beside Ophelia, a united front. "I support her terms. Shut down the trafficking, release the captives, or face exposure." "The High Council won't allow it." One of the council representatives, an ancient vampire named Silvestre, spoke for the first time. "Won't we? The Accord's operations have been a source of concern for decades. Too visible, too violent, too likely to expose us all. If the human has evidence that could threaten the masquerade, perhaps it's time we took her warnings seriously." Moraven's face went cold with fury. "You would side with a human over your own kind?" "I would side with survival. The humans have technology now, weapons, ways of finding us that didn't exist even a century ago. If Miss Everhart exposes vampire existence, we'll face a war we're not prepared to fight." Silvestre looked at Ophelia with something like respect. "Your terms are acceptable. The Accord will cease trafficking operations and release all captives within 1 month. In exchange, you'll keep our existence secret." "And what guarantee do I have that you'll keep your word?" "You have the word of the High Council, and you have King Stravaux' protection, which is worth more than you know." Moraven clearly wanted to argue, but even he didn't challenge the High Council's direct ruling. "Fine, 1 month, but if you break your word, human, no one will protect you. If you break yours, everyone will know what you are." They left the warehouse with the deal struck, and Isidore didn't breathe properly until they were back in the car and driving away. "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed," he said. "Really? You're 400 years old, and I've never seen anyone face down the Accord like that. I was bluffing half of it." "I know. That's what made it terrifying." She laughed, slightly hysterical, and he pulled her against him, holding her close while she shook with adrenaline and relief. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair. "I was terrified. You were both." They spent the next month working together to ensure the Accord kept their word. Isidore used his authority to inspect every location David's files had listed, finding humans held in conditions that made him ashamed of his own kind. Ophelia was there for every release, talking to the victims, connecting them with resources, making sure they had somewhere safe to go. She worked tirelessly, barely sleeping, pushing herself to the point of exhaustion. Isidore tried to make her rest, but she refused. "These people suffered because of David," she said one night, 3 weeks into the releases. "Because of someone I loved, someone I lived with, someone I thought I knew. I owe it to them to make this right." "You don't owe them anything. David's crimes aren't your fault." "Aren't they? I knew he was violent. I knew he was involved in something wrong. What if I could have stopped him sooner?" "Ophelia." Isidore made her look at him. "You were his victim too. You don't carry responsibility for what he did." "Then why does it feel like I do?" "Because you're a good person. Because you care. Because you wear red instead of black and refuse to pretend you're not angry." He touched her face gently. "But you can't save everyone. You can't fix everything he broke. I can try." He kissed her then, soft and careful, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with a desperation that spoke of fear and relief and want all tangled together. When they finally broke apart, she was crying. "I don't want to die," she whispered. "I know that's how this ends if I stay human. I know you'll outlive me by centuries, but I'm not ready yet." "Then we'll make sure you don't, not for a very long time." "How long do I have? Normally, I mean, if nothing kills me first." 50 years, maybe 60 if you're lucky and careful. And you'll live for centuries more. Probably. That's not enough time. It never is. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. What if I didn't stay human? Isidore went very still. What are you asking? You know what I'm asking. Could you turn me, make me like you? Yes. Would you? He wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to promise her forever, wanted to ensure she'd never leave him the way Celeste had. But he'd lived 400 years, and he knew what vampirism cost. Not yet, he said carefully. Why not? Because you need to be sure, because turning is permanent and painful, and you'd be giving up sunlight forever, because I won't take your humanity from you when you're making decisions based on fear. I'm not afraid. You just said you don't want to die. That's fear, Ophelia, and it's normal, but it's not a good reason to become a vampire. She looked away. Then what is a good reason? Choice. Clear, conscious, informed choice. When you've had time to grieve properly, to heal from what David did to you, to build a life you actually want to keep living. Then, if you still want forever, ask me again. And you'll say yes. I'll say yes. She nodded slowly. Okay. I can wait. Thank you. For what? For trusting me enough to wait. The month ended with every captive freed, every trafficking site shut down, the Accord's operations in North America completely dismantled. Ophelia kept her word about the files, destroying the copies after verification that everyone was safe. You could have kept them, Isidore said, watching her delete the last digital copy. Used them as insurance. I made a deal. I'm keeping it. She closed the laptop with finality. Besides, I have something better now. What's that? You. She started rebuilding her life. Found a new apartment, one that David had never touched. Started painting again, canvases full of red and gold and fierce, defiant color. Applied for gallery shows, began teaching more classes, slowly stopped looking over her shoulder every time she walked down the street. Isidore watched her heal, watched her become more fully herself without David's shadow hanging over her. She was brilliant and brave and absolutely unwilling to compromise who she was for anyone's comfort. He fell more in love with her every night. 6 months after David's funeral, Ophelia's first gallery show opened. She'd titled it Red instead of Black, and every painting was a study in defiance, in refusing to perform grief or shame or any emotion she didn't feel. The centerpiece was a self-portrait, her in the blood-red dress from the funeral, standing tall and unashamed. The gallery was packed. Critics, art collectors, people who'd heard about the woman who wore red to her abuser's funeral and wanted to see what she'd created. Isidore stayed in the shadows, watching her talk about her work with passion and certainty. She found him eventually, weaving through the crowd in a red gown that made her look like flame-given form. You came, she said. Of course I came. I wouldn't miss this. What do you think? She gestured at the paintings surrounding them. I think Celeste would have loved you. I think you're the most talented artist I've seen in a century. I think you're going to be wildly successful, and you absolutely deserve it. She smiled, bright and genuine. High praise from someone who knew Renaissance masters. They had nothing on you. Flatterer. Truth-teller, you taught me to appreciate the difference. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the gallery owner was counting sales with barely concealed glee, Ophelia found Isidore again. Walk with me? She asked. They left the gallery, walking through the city streets under stars that Isidore had watched for centuries. She slipped her hand into his, and he laced their fingers together. I've been thinking, she said after a while. Dangerous occupation. About what you said, about choosing to turn, not just running from fear. His dead heart clenched. And? I've built a life I love. I'm painting again. I'm teaching. I'm happy. David doesn't control me anymore. The Accord doesn't control me. I'm finally free to be exactly who I am. You are. And who I am is someone who wants to spend forever with you. If you'll have me. Isidore stopped walking, turned to face her fully. You're sure? Completely. I know what I'm giving up. Sunlight, aging, a normal human life. But I also know what I'm gaining. Centuries to make art, to learn, to love you. That's worth it to me. It's painful. The turning. I've survived pain before. You'll be bound to the night forever. I paint better at night anyway. Ophelia, he cupped her face in his hands. If I do this, you're mine. Not in a possessive way, but in a real, permanent way. I will love you and protect you and annoy you for the next 1,000 years. Promise? Promise. She kissed him, and he tasted joy on her lips, certainty, the sweetness of a choice freely made. Then turn me, she whispered. Make me yours. Make me immortal. Make me family. He took her home to the estate, to rooms he'd prepared months ago just in case this day came. Victor had everything ready, medical supplies, blood stores, privacy wards to ensure they wouldn't be disturbed. Last chance to change your mind, Isidore said as she lay on the bed looking up at him without fear. Not changing my mind. Turn me. He bit his own wrist first, let his ancient blood well up dark and powerful. Drink. She did, grimacing at the taste but not stopping until he pulled away. Now the hard part, he said softly, and bit her throat. Her blood was exquisite, rich with life and love and art and defiance. He took only what he needed, then held her as the change began. She screamed, body arching with pain as vampire blood rewrote her humanity cell by cell. He whispered to her in languages she didn't know, promised her it would end, that she'd be magnificent, that he loved her beyond measure. It took 3 days. 3 days of fever and pain and transformation. Isidore never left her side, cooling her forehead, holding her hand, being there the way he couldn't be there for Celeste. On the 3rd night, she opened her eyes. They were the same color they'd always been, but brighter, clearer, infinitely more aware. She looked at him, and he saw recognition, love, and something new. Hunger. I know, he said gently. We'll fix that. He fed her from his own stores, taught her how to drink without killing, how to control the bloodlust that came with new vampirism. She learned quickly, brilliantly, the same way she learned everything. When she was strong enough to stand, he took her to the mirror. She stared at her reflection, at the white hair that had replaced her dark locks, at the pale skin that would never tan again, at the way she seemed to glow with an inner light. I'm beautiful, she whispered. You always were. Now you're just immortal too. She turned to him, and her smile was pure joy. Show me how to use it, all of it. The speed, the strength, all the vampire tricks. He spent the next weeks teaching her everything. How to move faster than human eyes could track. How to compel humans when necessary. How to fight, to hunt, to survive in the world that was now hers. She took to it all with the same fierce determination she'd brought to everything else. And through it all, she kept painting. Canvases full of night and stars and the beauty she found in immortality. I can see colors I couldn't see before, she told him one evening, working on a piece that seemed to glow from within. Vampire vision is incredible. Wait until you try painting with enhanced speed. You'll finish pieces in hours instead of days. I don't want to rush, I want to savor it. That's the difference between you and most new vampires. They're in such a hurry to use their power, they forget to enjoy it. She set down her brush and came to him, settling into his lap like she belonged there. Which she did. Thank you. For what? For waiting. For not turning me when I was scared and desperate. For letting me choose this when I was ready. Thank you for choosing it. For choosing me. Always you. They were married 6 months later in a ceremony that blended vampire tradition with human warmth. Victor stood as Isidore's witness, Mira as Ophelia's. The High Council sent representatives, acknowledging Ophelia as Queen of North America alongside Isidore. She wore red, of course, a gown the color of blood and rubies and defiance. You're never going to wear white, are you? Isidore asked as they danced at the reception. Not a chance. Red is my color. Our color now. Our color, she agreed. Years passed. Decades. Ophelia's art became legendary in both human and vampire circles, her work commanding prices that would have seemed impossible when she was mortal. She opened schools for young artists, funded galleries, created beauty wherever she went. And every year, on the anniversary of David's death, she wore red. "You don't have to keep doing this," Isidore said one such anniversary, watching her dress in crimson silk. "He's been dead for 50 years. I know. But I do it for me now, not because of him." She turned, and she was as beautiful as the day he'd first seen her. "I wear red to remind myself that I survived, that I chose truth over comfort, life over fear, love over safety, that I'm not ashamed of who I am or what I've lived through. You're magnificent. I'm yours. That too." They attended the memorial she'd established, a foundation that helped abuse survivors rebuild their lives. Every year she spoke to the crowd, told her story, reminded people that survival was possible. And every year, Isidore stood beside her, the vampire king who'd fallen in love with a woman in red and never looked back. One evening, a century after they'd met, Ophelia came to him with a painting. "I finished it," she said, turning the canvas around. It was them, the funeral, captured in vivid detail. The crowd in black, her in red, Isidore across the grave with his eyes fixed on her like she was the only real thing in the world. "When did you start this?" he asked, awed. "The day after we met. I've been working on it ever since, getting every detail right. It's called The Moment Everything Changed. It's perfect. It's us." He pulled her close. This woman who'd changed everything, who'd taught him to love again, who wore red instead of black and refused to apologize for it. "I love you," he said, "for now and always." "For now and always," she echoed, "though now is considerably longer than it used to be." "Disappointed?" "Never. I've got at least another few thousand years of things to paint." "Only a few thousand?" "I'm pacing myself." They hung the painting in the grand hall, where anyone who visited would see it. The woman in red and the vampire who couldn't look away. The moment that had changed 2 lives and countless others. And every night, when Ophelia painted in her studio and Isidore handled the political necessities of being king, they found each other again. In stolen moments, in lingering touches, in the certainty that they'd chosen exactly right. She'd worn red to her abuser's funeral, and the vampire king had fallen in love. It was, they both agreed, the best decision either of them had ever made. Decades turned into centuries, and still Ophelia wore red. On their anniversary, at gallery openings, at important vampire functions where everyone else defaulted to black. She became known for it, the Red Queen, the vampire who refused to fade into shadows. "They're calling you a fashion icon," Isidore told her one evening, reading from a vampire social column that Victor insisted he stay current with. How horrifying. "You don't want to be a fashion icon? I want to be an artist who happens to like red. The rest is just people looking for meaning where there isn't any. There's meaning. You taught me that. Red for truth, for defiance, for refusing to perform grief you don't feel." She looked up from her canvas, paint on her fingers, love in her eyes. "You remember. I remember everything about you. Comes with being immortal and besotted." Besotted. That's a good word. I'm 400 years old. I know all the good words. She laughed, and the sound still made something in his chest tighten with joy. They'd built a life together that spanned continents and centuries, art galleries in Paris, safe houses in Tokyo, a castle in Scotland that Ophelia had fallen in love with and insisted they restore. They helped vampires who needed it, protected humans who didn't know they needed protecting, built a world that was just slightly better than the one they'd found. And through it all, Ophelia kept her promise. She never stopped being exactly who she was, never compromised, never faded. "Do you ever regret it?" Isidore asked one night as they watched the stars from their Scottish castle. "Giving up mortality?" "Not once." "Do you regret turning me?" "Never. Though I do sometimes regret that you're so stubborn." "You love that I'm stubborn." "I really do." She curled against him, fitting into his side like she'd been made for exactly that space. "We did good, didn't we? Taking down the Accord, saving those people, building all this. We did extraordinary. David would hate what I've become." "Good. He deserved to hate it." I used to think about what I'd say to him if I could. If he could see me now, immortal and powerful and free, but I don't think about that anymore. Why not? Because he doesn't matter. He's dust and bones and forgotten. I'm here with you, with art and time and everything I could ever want. He lost. I won. That's all that matters. Isidore kissed the top of her head. You're very wise for someone who's only been a vampire for a century. I had a good teacher. You taught yourself. I just watched in awe. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky that would be theirs for eternity. In the distance, they could hear Victor arguing with Mira about something trivial, the sounds of their found family going about their immortal lives. Do you think about her? Ophelia asked quietly. Celeste? Sometimes. Less than I used to. Time does eventually dull even vampire memory. Tell me something about her I don't know. Isidore thought for a moment. She used to paint at dawn, right as the sun came up, because she said the light was perfect. I could never watch because of what I am, but she'd describe it to me. The way the colors changed, the way the world looked new every morning. I miss the sun sometimes, Ophelia admitted. Not enough to regret anything, but I do miss it. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be. I chose this, chose you, chose forever in the dark with you over a lifetime in the light without you. She turned to look at him. That's not a sacrifice. That's a victory. I love you more than I have words for, and I have 400 years of words. Then show me instead. He did, and the stars watched over them, and the night was theirs. Years continued to pass, marked not by aging but by art and love and the slow accumulation of memories. Ophelia's galleries spanned the world now, her work recognized by humans and vampires alike as something transcendent. She'd become what Celeste had never had the chance to be, an artist whose work would outlive civilizations. And Isidore stood beside her through all of it, the vampire king who'd learned to love again, because a woman wore red instead of black. One evening, at yet another gallery opening, a young human woman approached Ophelia. She was nervous, clutching a portfolio to her chest like armor. "Excuse me, Mrs. Stravaux. I'm sorry to bother you, but I had to tell you something." Ophelia gave her full attention, the way she always did with young artists. "You're not bothering me. What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Chen. I'm an artist, or trying to be. I saw your work when I was 16, the red instead of black collection, and it changed my life." "How so?" "I was in a bad relationship, really bad. Everyone kept telling me I should be grateful he paid attention to me, that I should try harder to make him happy. But then I saw your paintings, read your story, and I realized I didn't have to perform for anyone. I could just be honest, even if it made people uncomfortable." Ophelia's expression softened with understanding and fierce pride. "Did you leave him?" "I did. It was hard and people were angry, but I did it. And now I'm here, alive, painting, free." Sarah held out her portfolio with shaking hands. "I wanted to show you my work, to say thank you." Ophelia took the portfolio, studied each painting with care. They were raw, honest, full of the kind of pain that came from survival, and in every piece there was red. "These are extraordinary," Ophelia said finally. "Have you shown them anywhere?" "Not yet. I'm too scared." "Don't be. The world needs to see what you've created." Ophelia pulled out a business card. "Call this number tomorrow. Ask for Marcus. Tell him I sent you, and that I want your work in the next Emerging Artist Showcase." Sarah's eyes went wide. "You're serious?" "Completely. You have talent, courage, and truth in your work. That's everything that matters. I don't know how to thank you. Paint. Keep painting. Keep being honest. Keep surviving. That's thanks enough." Sarah left with tears in her eyes and hope in her expression, and Isidore slipped an arm around Ophelia's waist. "You're collecting protégés now?" "I'm helping people who need it, the way you helped me." "I didn't help you. You saved yourself. You gave me the space to do it, the safety to heal, the time to become who I was meant to be." She leaned into him. "That's what I'm giving her. A chance. You're going to change her life." "Good. Someone changed mine." They watched Sarah disappear into the crowd, another survivor finding her way, and Isidore marveled at the woman beside him. She'd taken her trauma and transformed it into art, into activism, into a legacy that would outlive them both. The Red Queen, they called her, the vampire who wore defiance like armor and turned survival into beauty. But to Isidore, she was simply Ophelia, his wife, his partner, his reason for believing that even after 400 years of existence, new love was possible. "Dance with me," he said, offering his hand. "Always." They moved together through the gallery, through the crowd, through the life they'd built from the ashes of her old one. And somewhere, in whatever afterlife existed for abusers, David Mercer was forgotten while Ophelia Everhart Stravaux became legend. It was, Isidore thought as he held her close, exactly the ending she deserved. Not an ending at all, really. Just a beginning that would last forever. She still wore red, every anniversary, every gallery opening, every important moment. And Isidore still couldn't look away, would never look away, had been staring at her with the same awe and devotion for over a century now. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching him watching her again. "That I'm the luckiest vampire who ever existed. You're not lucky, you're loved." "Same thing. Not even close." He kissed her then, in front of everyone, the Vampire King and his Red Queen, and the whole world could see exactly how much he adored her. And she kissed him back, fierce and certain and completely unashamed, because she'd worn red to her abuser's funeral instead of black, and the Vampire King hadn't been able to look away, and neither of them had ever looked back.